Welcome one and welcome all to the PFN Fantasy Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Tate. You can find me over at Derek Tate NFL over on X. That is the one and only Kyle Soppe. Find him over at Kyle Soppe PFN over on X. And of course, we are joined by the one and only Theo Ash. Find him over at Theo Ash over NFL over on X, formerly known as Twitter. Guys, week one is nearly in the books, which means we got to talk about some of the best and most concerning performances from week one of NFL action. Soppe, I'll start by throwing it over to you. It's always fun to get that full slate of football in for the start of the year. Oh, yeah. Did you have any big plans, watch parties or anything like that for week one?
Yeah, it's called work, man. Yeah, no, we're working from sun up to sundown on Sundays. That's how Sundays work around here. You got to chart everything. I've got notes on notes. I have way too much scrap paper. I run out of pens this time of year. It's a mess logistically, but I've got the TV set up. I've got the monitors. We've got a good life going here. I can't complain.
Theo, I don't know about you, but I got a chance to check out like kind of the new feature where you can look at the stats live in game on NFL Sunday Ticket or YouTube TV or whatever it was. I found myself staring at that thing far too often, trying to get a constant update on my fantasy squads. Did you use that feature at all?
I didn't use that one, but I was using the NFL Plus Premium stat package a little bit, which gives me some insight into what is happening as it's happening. So I was definitely locked into that and some of the true media numbers as well, like that you can look at in the middle of the game. So I was the 1 o'clock window I was locked in. The 4 o'clock window, I would say I was doing more research about the 1 o'clock window, and then we were back on for the Sunday night game. It was kind of my general strategy.
It's data overload at times. Once you get the 1 p.m. slate, then you get to 4 p.m. You're trying to keep up with the action that's going on the football field. Too much football is a good thing, which you're going to get here at Pro Football Network, which, by the way, if you have not yet done so, go ahead, subscribe, hit the like button. Make sure you click the bell so you get notified every single time we drop a new bit of content here on the Pro Football Network YouTube channel. But, guys, first, before we touch on some of the most encouraging and most concerning performances from week one, we got to talk about some injuries. And the first game in Brazil for the NFL, I got to say, looked a little concerning because the field conditions were rough, to say the very least. You guys obviously follow the Green Bay Packers passionately. Soppe, I'll start off with you because with the third to last snap of this contest, Jordan Love suffers a knee injury. It looks like he could be on the shelf for 3 to up to 6 weeks. We saw an explosion from Jaden Reed in week one, feeling very confident that he looks like he was going to be a top 15, top 20 guy at the very least, if not entering that top 10 conversation with an outstanding debut in 2024. But now with Jordan Love on the shelf for the next couple of weeks at a minimum, and either it's Malik Willis or Sean Clifford on the docket to start under center for Green Bay. What are your thoughts on this injury to Jordan Love in week one?
Yeah, it's a shame. I mean, at the end where they're trying to maybe get in position for a Hail Mary to do something and he goes down, now he's going to miss a month. I'm glad it's only a month, or a month plus, whatever it is. It could have been far worse. I don't think the season's over for Green Bay, but they've been one of the better September teams here over the last couple of years. That doesn't seem like it's going to sustain. The schedule isn't that bad. So from a competitive standpoint, I'm okay. I think Josh Jacobs, I think the pieces in this offense can still, we're not talking about a lost cause where they're going to be 1-7 and you're like, oh yeah, maybe we won't fully go on Jacobs and Reed and those guys. Reed, like you said, looked great. He looked the part. I was thinking, I'm jotting down my ranks for week two. I'm like, okay, we got a good matchup. We could do some things. And then he gets hurt and Jaden Reed's outside my top 30 without much of a question. I don't think you can play him with any sort of confidence right now. And he's my clear-cut wide receiver 1 for Green Bay. So I'm not playing anybody in this offense outside of Josh Jacobs feeling good. And I really don't think Josh Jacobs looked all that good.
Theo, I want you to touch on this because not only did we see the knee pop on that scary play, but Jordan Love also lost his footing a little bit and was favoring his calf. He was getting his calf worked on the sideline a little bit in the second half. So these field conditions really muddy down what was a very encouraging performance and some bright flashes from this Green Bay offense. And now what are your thoughts with, potentially Malik Willis under center, who basically saw 2 snaps and did Malik Willis things, got sacked on one of those two plays, and he averages for his career getting sacked every 4.4 passing attempts in his NFL career. It's a very disappointing thing and concerning for the Green Bay offense, I would imagine.
Yeah, very concerning. I'm with Soppe, where I'm just glad it wasn't worse for Jordan Love, but I do think that if we see Malik Willis for the next month, it could really put the Packers behind the 8 ball because he is that bad. I mean, he's thrown 3 picks, 0 touchdowns in his career. You're talking about a nearly 25% sack rate. That's abysmal. That's as bad as it gets. So, yeah, those are 2 things that could really sink their season. I'm with you, Soppe, that yeah, Jaden Lee looked great. He was amazing. He was the wide receiver 1 like we predicted, but going forward, like he was on my bench for week 1, right? Yeah. He put up all those points on my bench. Maybe I should have started him, but he's not coming off my bench now, right? Like if I didn't think he was good enough before, like now it's a bit tough. So yeah, super unfortunate for the Packers. I do think that Josh Jacobs looked fine at the end of the day for me. I know that the first half he only had 4 yards or something like that. In the second, he did break tackles. He was explosive. I thought, like, if you changed the ordering of the runs around and it was more balanced, I feel like throughout the whole game, I don't think I would be as negative, but just like the initial bad taste from the first half kind of made it hard to appreciate a second when so many other things went wrong. I think that Jacobs can be fine, but again, like I don't know how many points this offense will put on the board, even if Jacobs is breaking tackles and like looking fine. So from a football perspective, the run game was actually good. Like the handoff to Jaden Reed, Jacobs, like they did have 5 explosive runs at the end of this game. So that's a good number to be at, but the run game I don't think can save Malik Willis.
It also helps when Emmanuel Wilson averages 11 yards per carry.
Hey, yeah. My guy.
Yeah. I mean, certainly that takes the wind out of the sails of potentially making him like a sneaky stash on your fantasy bench. But he still may be worth an add in deeper leagues and just kind of keep him on your bench until Jordan Love comes back. But we'll still have to see how that shakes out between him and Marshawn Lloyd behind Josh Jacobs moving forward. Speaking of moving forward, guys, we saw Puka Nacua, who was dealing with a knee injury throughout most of the preseason. Looks like he aggravated it, was even, jumped on the cart at halftime to go back to the locker room after a brief return to the field. Looks like he couldn't go. So guess what we got? We got 2021 version of Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, man.
14 receptions on 21 targets, 110 receiving yards, and 1 score against the Detroit Lions. Theo, I'm going to throw this to you first. Obviously, your reactions to Puka Nacua. I imagine for me, this immediately elevates Cooper Kupp back into the top 5 overall wide receiver picture while Nacua is unavailable. We're going to get more information here soon, I would imagine, on Nacua. But who else from this Rams offense intrigues you, whether it's Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, or maybe even Jordan Whittington to see an expanded role moving forward?
They all kind of do. I think they should probably be rostered if they're not, So I would, like, Tyler Johnson obviously had a fantastic play after the catch. That intrigued me. Jordan Whittington had a touchdown. Demarcus Robinson had some good moments last year. It's tough to say who would emerge if Puka was out. I think this is just goldfish brain of me remembering what I saw last night. But it seems like Tyler Johnson might not be a bad bet considering what he did with the ball in his hands, and Whittington scored. I don't know. I think they're all worth flyers.
Yeah, Soppe, we saw Tyler Johnson, 5 receptions on 7 targets for 79 yards. It did have a really nice catch and run. Jordan Whittington had a carry for a touchdown on a jet sweep, but that was called back due to a holding call. But still, we saw some encouraging things from Jordan Whittington throughout the entire preseason in that LA offense. So if there is a priority add when it comes to this group, who do you see as kind of the guy to target? Is it Tyler Johnson or is it, Demarcus Robinson, who had a nice, strong finish to last year, but was kind of outplayed by Johnson in the season debut?
Yeah, I still think it's Robinson, kind of without too much question. You mentioned the stop and go play from Tyler Johnson, and that was great. Don't get me wrong. Probably the highlight of the night for them when it comes to non-Cooper Kupp highlights, given that there were 6 of those plays the entire game. But he had that 63-yard play And then his other 6 targets for the day went for 16 yards. That's kind of a lot of nothing to Marcus Robinson. We at least saw him find pay dirt with consistency last season. Like you said, I'm kind of hoping that this is nothing for Puka. He seemed in good spirits and everything on the sideline. I'm no doctor. I'm no body language doctor. But I'm hoping that we're okay there, because if he's there and this version of Cooper Kupp is good to go, you could be looking at a Rams team that is ready to roll. And maybe Matthew Stafford's one of those pocket-locked quarterbacks that can still be an asset when it comes to our fantasy game. But them losing puts some urgency on this. You don't want to fall too far behind. They have Arizona, San Fran, Chicago, Green Bay coming up.
Quietly, the Rams offense was pretty efficient running the football last year behind an offensive line that was better than expected, but they're decimated up front right now. And I could see, you saw how quickly Stafford was trying to get the ball out of his hands, which makes me think that we could see a very dink and dunk offense there. With a lot of horizontal stretch West Coast principles. So Stafford immediately becomes a little bit more intriguing, because Kyren Williams, efficiency-wise on the ground, had a bit of a rough outing against a Detroit Lions defense that was really good against opposing running backs. I don't want to overreact to that. But also the snap count was very encouraging for Kyren Williams, because Blake Corum did not see an offensive snap yesterday. But certainly that Los Angeles Rams offense is one to monitor without Puka Nacua moving possibly on the shelf for the upcoming week or two. So we'll move to Seattle. That game between the Seahawks and Denver Broncos, kind of an interesting one, but we saw an encouraging performance from your guy, Soppe, Kenneth Walker. 103 rushing yards on 20 carries, found the end zone on the ground, but is dealing with an oblique injury. That's what kind of opened the door for Zach Charbonnet, who actually caught a touchdown pass. We know that that's a skill set that he has, and we've talked about, potentially this backfield being cleared up in the case of an injury happening to one of these two leading backs. But from what we saw yesterday, it looked like Kenneth Walker is the running back one when healthy. So what are your thoughts on the Seattle backfield, Soppe, with Walker kind of picking up an oblique injury in this contest?
Yeah, I think we saw everything we wanted from Kenneth Walker, and now we just need him on the field. He's missed multiple games in both of his seasons, so this is obviously a concern. That's why you bring in Charbonnet. This isn't one of those one-for-one situations, I don't think. I'm going to have Kenneth Walker, if active, as a top 15 running back. If he's inactive, I don't think Zach Charbonnet quite fills that role, but he's a good player. I have my questions. I know Theo's a little higher on this offense as a whole than I am, but I think Charbonnet is a starting fantasy running back should Walker miss. He obviously needs to be rostered, all that good stuff, but I'm not worried about Kenneth Walker long-term as long as he can get back on the field, the explosive skill set. If they're going to hand him the ball 20 times, he's going to break 2 or 3 of them in a significant way. It may not always be pretty, but I think he gets to the finish line more often than not.
So, and yeah, I want to throw it over to you, Theo, because you were pounding the table. I don't know if that's maybe a little bit strong, but you were high on Geno Smith. And I got to say, it was an encouraging debut. I mean, with only just, 2 quarterbacks left to kind of shake out the entire fantasy landscape, Geno Smith is quarterback 7 up to this point right now. And we saw some encouraging things in this new offensive scheme with Ryan Grubb as the offensive coordinator. So what are your thoughts on, sound off on the backfield and maybe Charbonnet's value if Walker misses any time, but also Geno Smith in this collection of pass catchers and what you thought of the debut through the air in this new offensive scheme for Geno Smith?
Yeah, I thought that it was a little bit of a false start in the first half. The offensive line did not look any better. Both tackles were getting dog walked, right? It was pretty brutal. But in the second half, they did find their footing a little bit. It went touchdown, field goal, touchdown. So I'm hoping that Geno can continue. Like we talk about, the offensive line was terrible in the first half. But like you said, he still finished his QB7. So going forward, I'm hoping that the results are there. I don't think he'll have a 30-yard rushing touchdown every week. That's for certain. So maybe that QB7 thing is a little bit artificially inflated. But I do think that the Seattle offense will turn things around a little bit. I think it already began in the second half. But it is something to monitor, that the offensive line doesn't get any better and the passing offense falls a little bit short. But I can't be too pessimistic after 1 week about some of my guys when they ended up winning the game. And I'm with you on Kenneth Walker. I think that he's just so good. So
Explosive is the word that comes to mind when it comes to Kenneth Walker. Fun to see him. Fun player out of Michigan State, has certainly shown some flashes through the first 2 years and had a great debut. We'll kind of hope that oblique injury is not something too serious. Let's go to Cleveland, where, boy, oh boy, it was an ugly day for the Cleveland Browns on both sides of the ball, namely on the offensive side. Soppe, I'm going to throw two names at you, though, because both of these guys were kind of in that low-end, tight end one conversation entering the year. David Njoku picked up an ankle injury. Jake Ferguson, we're hoping that he didn't, suffer any sort of significant knee injury, but it looks like both of those, starting tight end options have picked up some sort of injury in week number 1. What are your thoughts, Soppe, on, Dak Prescott, the Cowboys offense, if Jake Ferguson is to miss any time, and maybe try to make something of what happened with this Cleveland offense? And Njoku showed some encouraging things prior to the injury, 4 receptions for 44 yards, which is saying something with how bad Cleveland looked yesterday. But what are your thoughts on these injuries to these two tight ends?
Yeah, I think we're talking more about the quarterbacks and offenses as a whole when it comes to these situations. Obviously, these two tight ends are guys that are going to be in your top 12 if they're healthy, because it's tight end and they're involved pieces, they're secondary pieces in their respective offenses. I like Ferguson more than Njoku, but we'll see how the health shakes out. When it comes to the quarterbacks, I'm worried about Dak. I'm worried. You've got CeeDee Lamb. You've got one of the best in the world, but I've been loud, maybe too loud, about dismissing Brandon Cooks. I mean, he had the touchdown on an all-out blitz where I would have caught that. Like, they left him wide open for a touchdown. He had 19 yards otherwise. So I really don't see a secondary option in this offense. They were top 5 in pass rate over expectation last season. Do they bog it down if Ferguson's out and go to a run-heavy, almost an offense that kind of look like what the Rams look like, where it's CeeDee Lamb or nothing? Like, it was Cooper Kupp or nothing yesterday for the Rams. That worries me, because that's not sustainable for a guy like Dak, or Matthew Stafford for that matter. In Cleveland, good Lord, that offense is about as bad as it gets from a team that we think is any good at all. I don't know how you can feel good about anybody attached to this offense, be it Njoku, be it Amari Cooper, be it whoever the running back is. It's Jerome Ford now. I can't imagine Nick Chubb watched that game and he's like, oh yeah, I want to come back. I'm going to defy logic and come back and play for that team. So if I can avoid all Cleveland Browns, I think I'm doing it. And with Dallas, we'll see on Dak. He's not a top 10 quarterback for me.
Yeah, I mean, Jerome Ford, his fantasy outing was certainly a bit deceiving, to say the very least. Right now, I think he's like running back 8, but caught some passes at the backfield, scored a garbage time touchdown. So certainly, and Amari Cooper actually ran a great route and then dropped a touchdown pass where Deshaun Watson just got blown up. But bad across the board for the Cleveland Browns right now. They got to go back to the lab and hopefully get things squared away. But let's take a look back, though. Now it's time to really highlight some of the top performances of week 1 of NFL action. I think it's appropriate on Your Football Opinion, which you can check out here on the Pro Football Network YouTube channel. Theo, you had a great conversation with Mina Kimes about Isaiah Likely, and Likely went nuts, went off in week number 1, 9 for 111 and a score. And if he, I don't know what size his foot is, but if it's a half a size smaller, he probably catches 2 touchdowns. And potentially we have a 2-point conversion attempt to determine the winner of that week 1 matchup between the Ravens and the Chiefs. So what are your thoughts on Isaiah Likely's debut? And is this something, obviously maybe not sustainable, but where did you kind of put him in your tight end ranks after, him thoroughly outplaying Mark Andrews in week number 1?
Yeah, I don't know where. I haven't made an exact week 2 rankings, I'd say. I'm a bit of a liability maybe in that way. But I do think that he is legit. I think that he is here to stay. Last time they played each other in the AFC Championship game, the Ravens, that is, only played 6 snaps of 12 personnel. This year, it felt like that should be their best offensive personnel grouping to be in, and we were just kind of seeing how much they were going to lean into it. They leaned into it a lot. They were in 12 with Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely out there a lot. And if that's the way they want to play, I think Isaiah Likely is one of their best weapons, right? I think he showed that. However, it's not always going to be the likely game, right? I think that Mark Andrews isn't washed. I think that he had some good routes over the course of the game where he was not targeted, but was like looking suitably athletic. There was a crosser. And I think part of the thing that people don't realize about route running is how much of it is just about keeping yourself clean as you cross the middle of the field. And there was one crosser I watched from Andrews where he was on like the hero's journey, like the defensive end jammed him. He like juked that guy out. Then Leo Chanel tried to reroute him and give him a big push. He like swam over him, and then the safety rotated down to try to get hands on him, and he like kind of stiff armed him mid route and accelerated and like cleared everybody out of the middle of the field on this crosser. And he wasn't targeted, but he opened up a big spot for Bateman. And just watching that and kind of watching the way he was moving over the course of the game, I was like, okay, he still has some juice in his body here. It just seemed like he was one of the guys that Spags was focused on taking away. We saw him get doubled a couple times. We saw him bracketed, and likely a lot of the time was feasting on underneath balls. Like Lamar would look down the field, likely would block and release out into the flat. They'd throw it to him, great for PPR, right? And he would do something with the ball in his hands. He's fantastic. But I don't think it's going to look that way every week. I think that the wide receivers, Mark Andrews, are going to be more involved in the future. It's not going to be so likely heavy. So I think that he's going to be kind of a sketchy play from week to week. But if you drafted him in best ball, like, you're probably golden because, yeah, man, he's capable of some incredible things. That touchdown up the sideline was great, and he can block. He was great blocking, and he can run routes too. So there's nothing wrong with him. I just think there's going to be more competition for targets going forward.
I'm glad you touched on the way that the Kansas City defense was giving him attention. It's not that I thought that he was washed or that it was like, hey, we're not trying to involve Mark Andrews in the passing game hierarchy. It's Lamar Jackson's going with the ball where it's supposed to go when certain guys are covered. And if you're going to leave Isaiah Likely unchecked underneath, this is the type of stat line that he can produce. It was very encouraging, though, that he saw over 60% of the offensive snaps with Mark Andrews healthy, Soppe. And I think that that's the takeaway. Sure, in the tight end week one production, it was a wasteland, Soppe. Only 5 tight ends in full PPR formats have scored double-digit points, and 2 of them play on the New Orleans Saints and not named Taysom Hill and Foster Moreau and Jawan Johnson. So does this make Isaiah Likely worth a low-end tight end one ranking or confidence starting him based on his week one involvement in the passing game and how much he was on the football field?
We're really early in this for week 2, but he's my tight end 12, and Mark Andrews is tight end 10 for me in week 2. I think this is going to be kind of what we see from the 49ers with their trio. We've got Ayuk, Debo, and Kittle. In Baltimore, obviously, you've got their 3 with Flowers and the 2 tight ends, where I think 2 out of 3 are going to be productive more often than not. Which 2 is anybody's guess, and you're not going to get high volume passing games out of this offense. You're just not. They're going to want to run the ball. Derrick Henry's going to have better days. We saw in the first drive, and that was pretty much it from him. But we're going to see them go run heavy. We're going to see them be creative. Isaiah Likely, not a flash in the pan skill set wise, but I don't think he's out targeting Andrews 11-2 on an even route distribution on any kind of consistent basis. Like Theo said, this was clearly what Kansas City wanted to happen. It happened. They damn near got burned, but I don't think this is how every team's going to approach the Ravens.
So speaking of how to approach certain offenses, we got our first glimpse as Saquon Barkley as the running back 1 in Philadelphia. And boy, oh boy, what a debut it was. 3 total touchdowns, 109 yards on the ground to go with another 23 through the air. Soppe, right now, he's the running back 1 overall in fantasy football with just 1 game left to play. Maybe Christian McCaffrey has something to say about that. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts. The Green Bay Packers defense did struggle somewhat last season with slowing down opposing running backs, to say the very least. I'm trying to put it very gently. But Barkley's debut and his usage in this offense, including, the one where he scored a touchdown reception running a wheel route through the B gap, kind of a weird design, but one that worked out from Kellen Moore, and a nice ball from Jalen Hurts. And maybe the lack of efficiency for the tush push. Is this something where Saquon Barkley should be in top 3 consideration based on his debut in this Eagles offense?
I'm not going to get it to top 3, but top 10 isn't a stretch at all. And if you have him, I think you're probably dancing with where you got him in the draft. He was drafted at essentially what now I view as his floor. Like, if he's going to get 26 touches like this, I don't want to say there's no way for him to fail, but he's kind of like a rich man's Kenneth Walker, where if you take enough swings like that, he's going to make you pay. I don't care how good your defense is. Obviously wasn't the case on Friday night. The Packers defense, not one I'm too scared of, but he had 10 carries, gaining at least 3 yards after contact. He only did that once last season. And with a better offensive line, the fact that he still got juice like that in an Eagles offense that's going to feature him at least to some degree, yeah, he's a running back 1 without much question. Do I think we see 3 touchdowns again next week? I don't, but he's going to be productive. He's going to be a running back 1. He's going to be valuable for you got him.
The lack of efficiency on the tush push is something that I hope that they get figured out for the folks that invested high draft capital in Jalen Hurts. But, certainly the usage and effectiveness and juice that we saw from Saquon Barkley can't do anything but be encouraged if you invested first or second round draft capital in Barkley. And his change of scenery has, through 1 week, looked to be pretty fantasy friendly. Let's move to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And how real is the Baker Mayfield show, the Bake Show going on in the Bay? 4 touchdown passes, Theo, 6 incompletions, 289 yards through the air. He, just for good measure, ran for 21 yards as well. Theo, are you buying that Baker Mayfield in this passing offense is one that is going to produce, I maybe at a top 10 clip, not QB1 overall every single week? Or was this more so just a lack of talent on the back end from the Washington Commanders defense, with Dan Quinn making his, debut as the head coach there in Washington? What do you make of the performance from Baker Mayfield in week?
Well, I think part of it is obviously the Commanders' defense. They were the worst in the league last year. This was an ideal matchup for Tampa Bay and Mike Evans. The Commanders allowed 20 touchdowns beyond 15 air yards last year. That is far more than the next worst defense. They just get shellacked through the air. Emmanuel Forbes being, I think, the most famous guy who gets picked on. But really, every single corner is susceptible to giving up the long ones, and that's exactly how Tampa Bay wants to play. So I am slightly like, okay, this is definitely a Commanders thing. Can you do it again next week versus the Lions? But like, Evans looked very good. Like, he didn't look like he had lost a step. Same thing with Chris Godwin. There was nothing slow about them or laboring. So with that, and I think one of my theories going into the season was, look, Canales isn't going to be that crazy of a loss. Like, this offense was good last year, but it wasn't masterfully called in a way that cannot possibly be replicated. So I think the fears of maybe him leaving sinking everything I'm selling, I think the Buccaneers will probably end up at the end of the day being average as opposed to elite. But I do think that these guys are, startable if you went low on quarterback and you got Baker at the end. I don't think that was a bad strategy. And obviously, I think Evans can still be productive in Godwin. So I think they can finish where they were at last year.
So, yeah, I mean, Baker Mayfield, from my vantage point, actually kind of overthrew slightly. One of his 6 incompletions was to a wide open Jalen McMillan, who I thought was going to have a really nice day. He even drew a pass interference call on Emmanuel Forbes that could have probably been another 30-plus yard touchdown. Could have been a monster day for Jalen McMillan. Still found the end zone once, though. And Baker Mayfield, I think that it's more so the fact that they faced off against this porous Commanders secondary, but the level of efficiency that we saw from Baker Mayfield, he looked comfortable in this new offensive scheme, and certainly the options still look very competent, and the addition of Jalen McMillan does give me a little bit of optimism that Mayfield does have maybe top 12 upside in this offense moving forward. We'll touch on real quick, Soppe, I know you were super high on Jaden Daniels. Daniels, had himself a nice debut, despite the fact that Terry McLaurin was pretty much a ghost. They didn't get much from anybody else as far as pass catching contributions. But we saw why Jayden Daniels can be such a dynamic fantasy impact player from the jump with his legs. What did you think about Jayden Daniels' debut?
Yeah, I thought he was bizarro Anthony Richardson. I mean, we know both have the ability to break the game on the ground, but well, Anthony Richardson was fading back and throwing 65-yard bombs off his back foot in the face of pressure. Jayden Daniels had a 5.2 ADOT. You know, that's a little, I'm not concerned about that. I actually kind of like it. If he's going to rush 16 times, I'm okay with a low ADOT that's going to solidify his passing yardage and get us in the 200-yard range, knowing that he can get double-digit points on the ground. So I liked what I saw. He's reckless. We knew that coming out of college. We all know the highlight where he gets blown up on like first down in the middle of a game that means nothing. That's going to be part of it for him, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in-game for fantasy managers. It's tough to go through 4 months like that, but I think Jayden Daniels showed what he needed to be a viable starting quarterback this year.
He looked.
Sorry, go ahead, Theo.
He had the best debut of the rookies, and I know it was a little bit less of a accomplishment with 2 of them sitting, one of them injured, and the other 2 looking terrible. But yeah, I liked what I saw from him. I thought he looked confident. I thought he looked comfortable. I thought he looked really elusive. I wasn't sure like exactly how many tackles he was going to break or how. Like I was very curious to see exactly how dynamic he was going to be when he takes off at the NFL level, because I feel like so many times at LSU when he was running, guys just kind of expected him to slide and he didn't. And he would just like keep going with his unlimited stamina and he would just run all the way to the end zone untouched. It's like in the NFL, these guys are faster. You know, you're actually going to have to make them miss as opposed to just kind of changing your angle and burning them all the time. So I was like, how elusive can he really be? But he was breaking tackles. He was tiptoeing the sideline. Like I thought that he looked as dynamic as you could have possibly hoped for on the ground.
If you don't keep contained with him, he glides when he hits that extra gear. Now, granted, when I'm interested to see how he performs against the New York Giants, Soppe, who I think have more pass rushing juice than the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Joe Tryon-Trianka and, you know, Yaya Diaby. I'm kind of concerned about that specific matchup, but there's no way that you can't say that you didn't see some positive things from Jayden Daniels in his debut. Speaking of debuts, J.K. Dobbins. My goodness. Coming off of another injury, 10 carries, 135 yards, and a score against the Las Vegas Raiders in his Los Angeles Chargers debut. Theo, we were looking for the answer to the question, who's the fantasy back to potentially invest in on draft day? Because, you know, we know the Chargers want to run the football. They did run the football, but J.K. Dobbins looked healthy and like the best option in this backfield by a wide margin. What are your thoughts on Dobbins' debut in Los Angeles?
I love it. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to get burned again. I've been hyping up J.K. Dobbins for such a long time coming out of Ohio State. Just absolutely loved him. But just suffered so many injuries that I thought maybe his time was over. It was time to stop. The agenda had never gone well for me. But now that I saw that, I'm all the way back on board. I think that Alt looked amazing against Max Crosby. I think in general, the Chargers offensive line is going to be good. The Harbaugh effect is already happening where it was a really high run rate overall. And he's a dynamic player. I think he should have scored maybe on that long run, and he just kind of ran out of gas. But maybe that's just a week 1 thing. Maybe he can get in better shape and actually start to land those home runs and turn them into touchdowns. But it was good that he hit those explosives at all and looked like that top guy. I'm excited that he's back. He is great. He is super elusive, low center of gravity to give him like really good balance, I think. And he was reading everything out really well behind the line of scrimmage. I was happy.
Soppe, when it comes to this backfield, and, you know, we saw Dobbins look like the preferred option back in Baltimore when they were both on the same team with the same offensive coordinator and Greg Roman when Dobbins was healthy. So the fact that he looks healthy had plenty of juice, was clearly a more efficient ball carrier than Gus Edwards in week number 1. Where do you see Dobbins kind of falling in the rankings? Is he a solid top 20 play in this run heavy scheme?
I mean, I don't want to be the wet blanket. Yes, you can go that direction in week 2. I have no problem with that. But is he not like the perfect sell high kind of guy right now? He was running as hot as you could in a good matchup at full health, and he got 13 touches. What is his touch ceiling? And if he's not breaking these massive carries, what are we doing? I mean, there's been 3 Charger running backs since the turn of the millennium that have had 2 45-yard carries in the same game. It was LaDainian Tomlinson, Michael the Burner Turner, and now J.K. Dobbins. Like that's a list I don't think he necessarily belongs on. He's a sell high for me. He's a starter for now, but you're talking about a guy that's played 25 games across 4+ seasons in the NFL. If you're willing to bet on that, you're a riskier manager than I.
Okay. Thanks for pouring the water on the fire there, Soppe. I appreciate it.
Do it.
Touch on real quick the Houston Texans. We got some glimpse of what Stephon Diggs' role was going to be in this offense. 6 for 33, but hey, 2 touchdowns, and that's what fantasy managers care about a little bit. But Soppe, Joe Mixon, real quick, 33 touches, 178 yards, and a score in his debut. We were worried about what his involvement in the passing game was going to be and his efficiency, but at this point, do we think that Mixon in this offense probably elevates himself into a top 10 consideration at the position, or if not higher?
I've got him at 14 next week against the Bears. I'm more concerned about Diggs if we're going to poke holes in one of these Texans here. But Mixon picked up over 5 yards on 47% of his carries. I don't know how you get that kind of usage. He had the ball 33 times. He didn't have a carry gain more than 13 yards. I still have the efficiency concerns. I still have all of that. I don't think they're going to hold the ball for 40 minutes a game like they did the other day. But I think he's better than we thought he was. Like I said, 47% over 5 yards in this game. That was under 32% a season ago. So maybe he's got some juice. Maybe the offense opens things up for him. Stephon Diggs is the concern for me because he did all that with hardly any depth of target. We saw his role decline in Buffalo. He couldn't make the downfield plays. And this game, he went 6, 33, and 2. He had fewer total air yards in the entirety of the game than he averaged per target with the Bills in each of the last 3 seasons. That is bananas, and it's not really a way to make your living here. Stephon Diggs, I don't want to say it's his best game of the season because that's kind of overshooting it for a guy that had 33 yards, but I don't think there's many more like this in store.
It made me feel confident that Nico Collins is the guy that you want in this offense.
Yeah,
and boy, oh boy, he basically gave the Indianapolis Colts, showed them to the door with that great reception to end the contest. What did you think of Nico Collins' performance in week 1, Theo?
He's 6'3". He's 220 pounds. He catches everything. He runs great routes, and he can pick up whatever he wants after the catch. I mean, he's that guy. I think Diggs, Dell, Mixon, it could all kind of fluctuate week to week. I think Collins will always be there.
Yeah.
Speaking of someone that'll always be there, at least for the long-term future, I'm super excited about Brock Bowers leading the Las Vegas Raiders with 6 receptions for 58 yards. That's not a great stat line, but I'll take it as a top 5 tight end. Soppe in week number 1. Yeah, let's go. All gas, no brakes. Whatever. But hey, Brock Bowers involved in the passing game. For real. Like, we were worried about him potentially suffering the Dalton Kincaid effect where he's off the field because of Michael Mayer. It was very encouraging to see him, lead the Raiders in receptions in his pro debut when he was even dealing with an injury earlier this week. So good things from Brock Bowers. But we got to touch on some of the underwhelming performances. Certainly some of the quarterback performances. In fact, across the league, it felt like there were just not many touchdown passes thrown.
There weren't.
Across the league. But, maybe the most noteworthy Joe Burrow against New England. He did have Jamar Chase, and Chase was on the field quite a bit, and he still only threw for 164 yards, 8.1 fantasy points. That's not going to do it. Caleb Williams has all these weapons, a new offensive scheme, the whole 9 yards, 93 yards, 15 rushing, no scores. Also a rough debut. Soppe, I don't want to spend too much time on it because we got to get to a couple other guys. But any thoughts, concerns about these two players who were kind of, either a top 10 or a top 12 option in draft season? Like, what are your thoughts on their debut and how concerning it is, and who you're more concerned about moving forward?
I think I'm more concerned about Caleb Williams, and that's still TBD. But Joe Burrow, his ADOT's been trending in the wrong direction. I'm willing to give him a little bit of a pass with the Chase thing being weird. Higgins not there. And, I mean, if we're going to knock Baker because of the defense he's playing against, we have to give New England some credit. They won the game. They defend like anybody. I mean, I don't think they're going to win more than 5 games this year, but they're going to defend for 17 weeks this season. They took it to Joe Burrow. He still went 6 for 6 thrown to Jamar Chase. So, like, that connection, you get T. Higgins back. What concerns me about Caleb Williams, they found a way to win this game with him throwing for under 100 yards on almost 30 pass attempts. Like, I get the way they won with the defensive touchdown, all that stuff, a little aberrational, but the idea that Caleb Williams was coming into the NFL and we thought he was going to lead this team potentially to the playoffs and basically put him on his back like CJ Stroud did last year. I don't think they need that. This defense might just be legit. They've got some options. I don't think every game is going to be where you can score 24 points with your quarterback throwing for 93 yards. So better times are ahead, but I think Jaden Daniels pretty clearly solidified himself as the rookie you want in fantasy this year.
Yeah, Bo Nix didn't look very good, but he did score a rushing touchdown at the very end of the game. And I'm willing to give it a more than 1 week because you're making your start on the road in Seattle against a Mike McDonald-led defense. I'm going to be a little bit – I want to see a little bit more from Nix, but it definitely was not a very encouraging debut for him either. But we're going to go to Miami because this was a weird game in multiple ways. Tyreek Hill getting, detained, before the game. And, then he still scores an 80-yard touchdown. But really the backfield, Theo, with Raheem Mostert, I'm looking at him, 8 touches for 19 yards against Jacksonville. There was no Jalen Wright in this contest. We got, a little bit of Jeff Wilson, but it did look like it was clearly Devon Achane as the preferred option and the most efficient and effective option, at least in the passing game. What are your thoughts on this Miami backfield after week 1?
Well, my main takeaway after watching this game is beware starting your running backs against the Jaguars defense, to be honest with you. I thought that they did a fantastic job. The linebackers, Devin Lloyd and Oluokun, flowing to the sidelines, making tackles behind the line of scrimmage over and over and over again. It was really tough sledding the entire day for Miami's backfield. And I think you got to give a lot of credit to the Jaguars really the entire day on defense. They were playing man coverage a lot on these Miami receivers. They held for such a long time. And then there's only so long you can do it. And then Tyreek runs across her and outruns everybody. But overall, I really liked what I saw from Jacksonville more than I hated what I saw from what Miami was doing. I do think that I was very high on both Achane and Mostert because I did think it was going to be kind of this 1-2 punch like Montgomery and Gibbs, with Mostert playing the more heavy role and then Achane being this change of pace, the receiving guy who can break off long ones and do so much with his opportunities. I mean, I'm a little concerned about Mostert at his age, not breaking tackles, definitely. But with Achane, I think because it was happening to him as well, I think that we can just say hey, maybe Jacksonville is just good. And there's not too much reason to be concerned. I think when Miami runs across a defense that isn't so well prepared, they're certainly capable of going absolutely nuclear again, I think. But
patience a little bit with this Miami backfield. Probably give it another week with Raheem Mostert before you hit the panic button. But Soppe, one guy that we could potentially hit the panic button on, Drake London. We were super optimistic and hopeful about the change in offensive scheme, the improvement potentially at under center, going from Desmond Ridder to Kirk Cousins. But the final product in week number 1, 3 targets, 2 catches for 15 yards against the Pittsburgh Steelers. What are your thoughts on Drake London? Is this a great buy low opportunity? Of course it is, but is it one that you find yourself wanting to go out of your way to go acquire Drake London after week 1?
See, the idea with buy low after week one is that I'm not sure anybody's willing to sell low. After you invested what you did in Drake London, that's kind of going to be a tough case. You're going to have to pay pretty close to sticker value. So I'm not sure I would be going into the trade market looking for London at 95 cents on the dollar right now. You look at last season, week one of last season, 5% target share. This week, just under 11. So, I mean, he started last season with one bad game. That was against the Panthers. You're talking another possible good matchup, and he fell short of expectations. I'm going to give him more than a game here. Kirk Cousins getting worked in, all that good stuff. Is it discouraging? Of course it is. But like you said, passing numbers were down across the board. Marvin Harrison was a ghost for his game. We saw a lot of underachieving in the passing game as a whole. I'm going to write that off to defenses being ahead of offenses to start. But Drake, don't give me a few more games like this. Otherwise, we're going to have some difficult discussions.
Very difficult discussions. And speaking of which, I know that you mentioned, Theo, speaking of going to Arizona, taking a look at Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 catch for 4 yards, 3 targets. He even had a drop as well. And for a guy that I'm very high on and think is going to have a great NFL career. And I saw some positive things from Kyler Murray in this one, but Greg Dortch, 6 catches for 47 yards, led the way for this passing attack. What are your thoughts on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s outlook in his rookie year after a obviously very disappointing week 1 performance?
I have no idea what happened. I was not watching this one closely enough. And then I checked my ESPN league and with some of my college friends, and I noticed that my second round pick, Marvin Harrison, only had 1 reception. I was like, what is going on? So I'm wondering, just like everybody else, to be honest with you, I'll look at maybe what the Bills were doing on defense. Why did this look the way that it did? But I just can't imagine that it looks like this the rest of the way. I know what I saw from him on tape as a prospect. For him to not get like a single target on 3rd down, for example. Same thing with Drake London. Neither of them had a target on 3rd down at all. You'd think on a money down like that, that's where you'd want to be going with the football. I have to imagine it was just the defense having a good plan and that the offenses will start to adjust going forward and finding ways to get these stars the ball because they're good players. There is no way it should ever be this bad, but I can't even tell you how I wasn't. That's as soon as this podcast is over, that's the first thing I'm going to figure out.
Surprising to say the very least, as far as those 2 dud performances, 2 players, very talented players in Marvin Harrison and Drake London, combining for 6 targets, 3 targets each in the season opener. Definitely a head scratcher, but Soppe, some other receivers that saw a little bit more volume, but still very lackluster in the final box score. Michael Pittman, 8 targets. Keenan Allen, 11 targets. Amari Cooper, 9 targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 6 targets. And none of them cleared 8 fantasy points in full PPR formats in week number 1. What are your thoughts of, these 4 players who we've seen handle high volume in the past and produce exceptional fantasy numbers, in particular full PPR formats, all put up a dud in week 1?
Yeah, I'm not sweating it for the most part, and I'll circle back to that in a second. Harrison, with the poor game, Kyler Murray had more time to throw yesterday than any other quarterback in the league, so that makes me think Buffalo was just kind of sitting back and said, we want one guy to not beat us. That happened to be Marvin Harrison. We've seen these star pedigree receivers slow out of the gates at times over the last 20 years. Only one top 10 receiver has ever had 75 yards in a game in his debut. That was Jamar Chase. So maybe Marvin Harrison isn't Jamar Chase. That's fine. A slow start is going to happen. Better days ahead for him. And I think most of the guys you listed there, Pittman, 8 targets, I'll take that to the bank. It was just Anthony Richardson airing it out, which is going to happen because Pittman doesn't run down the field quite like that, but I think it'll stabilize over time. Keenan Allen, I like seeing 11 targets. I don't know what to make of that Chicago passing game as a whole, but the fact that he's seeing that kind of target share, and he was pretty clearly ahead of Odunze. That was the coin flip coming into the game. I think he pretty clearly established himself as the option there. That's all I needed. I need that. He's got more of a resume than for me to disrespect him for a 7 fantasy point game. Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's going to be fine. The Lions are a threat to make the Super Bowl. Jared Goff could win the MVP. Things are going to be better there. Amari Cooper might well be fantasy dust, and that's nothing against Cooper. Like you said, he had a drop. He had some potential there. But if Deshaun Watson doesn't get his act together and doesn't look like a top 20 quarterback?
Top 32.
He might not be a top 32 quarterback. He's definitely not one of the better quarterbacks in the state. He's not. I don't know where we're going here. If he rebounds, sure, but I don't understand how you could possibly feel good about starting a single Brown. We said it earlier. I'll say it again. If he's getting 9 targets, that's fine. Those are empty calories. That's like having sugar, like chocolate bars for breakfast and wondering why the doctor's not telling you good things. Like, you're getting a lot of calories, great. He's getting a lot of targets. They mean nothing right now. Deshaun Watson is a lost cause. That could flip. We saw bits and pieces, and he was an MVP candidate like 3-4 years ago. But until we get proof of concept, I'm going to be late to the party. Amari Cooper and this offense need to show it to me before I'm investing in it.
Definitely a little bit concerned about every single one of the names on this list outside of Amon-Ra St. Brown. You mentioned the Chicago passing game. Look, if Caleb Williams is going to struggle like that, then and he's got 3 talented pass catchers on this offense, 4 if you include Cole Kmet. Going to be tough to trust any of them on a weekly basis. Anthony Richardson, by the way, my goodness, with some of the vertical passing attacks, he even missed Adonai Mitchell on one, but certainly that's not really Michael Pittman's game. Little bit of concerns there for, Pittman in this offense, if that is the vertical element that they want from Anthony Richardson under center. Theo, did you want to add anything on that? Because I thought there were some good things from Anthony Richardson in week 1, even though they didn't come away with a W.
I loved Anthony Richardson's performance. Like, was it that good? I don't know, but I loved it. I think their strategy is, look, we're not going to get 20 in rhythm, beautiful completions for him. So let's get the production of 20 completions on 9 completions. And I don't hate the strategy. It's like, look, if you can only complete a couple times a game, make them the most valuable completions that they can possibly be. And yeah, Adonai Mitchell should have had a huge day and didn't. Obviously, Pierce was a monstrous performance. I'm excited for Downs to come back because I do think that they have a good connection underneath. Like, they kind of have some chemistry on the choice routes, like finding those spots in zones. He goes to Granson underneath in the preseason and in this game, and he's throwing picks. Those two aren't quite on the same thing. And I honestly think his connection with Pittman is a little bit off. I don't think that Pittman is always where Richardson wants him to be. I do think that that's why I was a bit low on Pittman, is just because I think as the season goes on, he could find targets that he likes better. It's just that Pittman has kind of been the only healthy guy there now. I think that Mitchell and Downs and Pierce are all formidable threats in this offense. So I was worried about Pittman going into it. I am a little worried about him, but 8 targets, obviously not a complete disaster.
Not a complete disaster, but, certainly some eyebrow-raising things to keep an eye on for Pittman's value. Maybe he's not an automatic start in your fantasy lineup if this trend continues. Soppe, speaking of trends continuing, one final thing we got to touch on, because this tight end was a breakout guy for a lot of fantasy managers, and for good reason. Dalton Kincaid, Buffalo Bills, departures of Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis. We mentioned it ad nauseum this offseason, and I had some concerns about his ability to be on the football field in certain personnel packages. He saw 84% of the snaps in week 1 and saw 2 targets for 1 catch for 11 yards, tight end 37 in full PPR formats. I'm sorry, I'm overreacting maybe a little bit. Or am I? Because that is concerning to me. And it was a game script, too, that they were behind. Josh Allen, I thought, played pretty well. I know he turned the ball over a little bit, but, for the most part, Allen had a pretty damn good day. And Kincaid, 2 targets, 1 catch, 11 yards. What happened?
And the missed target was a red zone target, and the catch didn't come until late. Like, it was, if a box score can be if a game could be worse than 1 catch for 11 yards, it might have been that for Dalton Kincaid in week 1, and that's a problem. But I don't think it's here to stick. Like, he doubled up Knox in routes, so I'm not too worried about his role or anything like that. He was my tight end 2 last week. I couldn't have been more wrong. What you just said, he was 36, 37. There's only 32 teams in the NFL. That's hard to do with a game left and 2 tight ends that probably outproduce him this week. So he's going to borderline be a top 40 tight end. I think you hit rock bottom out of the gate. It's not any fun, but you get the Dolphins on Thursday night. Quick chance to bounce back. Josh Allen, he's only 13 for 13 in terms of throwing for multiple touchdowns for his career against the Dolphins. So I could see a situation when he gets back on track. He's my tight end 4 for week 2. I didn't really hesitate in doing it, but man, did that burn yesterday.
I'm going to lean with you here. I'm not going to panic because it didn't seem like anybody else in the Buffalo offense really elevated themselves as the clear alpha target earner. I mean, it was Keon Coleman, 4 receptions, 51 yards. Nice debut, to be perfectly honest with you. Khalil Shakir, 3 catches, 42 yards, and a great highlight-worthy touchdown falling into the end zone. Continues to be dynamic after the catch. But then it was, James Cook, 3 for 32, and Matt Collins, 2 for 25 and a score. Like, there's still the opportunity that we believe Kincaid could emerge as the top guy in this passing attack, but certainly some concerning signs. Maybe a buy low if you still believe in Kincaid. He's a great talent, but definitely one that made me scratch my head big time in week number 1. And that'll do it for this episode of the PFN Fantasy Podcast. Taking a look back at the week 1 best performances and concerning ones. But if you have not yet done so, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button. Make sure you click the bell so you get notified when we drop a new PFN Fantasy Podcast episode here on the YouTube channel over at Pro Football Network. Again, we're going to have our rankings, waiver wire ads, maybe some trade targets over on profootballnetwork.com/fantasy. Go ahead and check that out as well. For Theo Ash and Kyle Soppe, I'm Derek Tate. And until next time, everybody, later, says the Tater.